I used to think peace was something you could buy. After 30 years working for the U.S. Forest Compliance Bureau, 3 decades of tangled paperwork, lying contractors and environmental lawsuits, I figured I'd earned a few quiet years. I wanted land, sky, and silence. So when I turned 59, I sold everything I owned in Portland and drove south until the city lights faded from my rearview mirror. I landed in northern New Mexico on a rough, sun-bleached slope outside a town called Pine Mesa. There, tucked between red rock ridges and juniper groves, I found 9 acres of unclaimed hillside. It wasn't pretty at first glance, just cracked soil, scattered boulders, and the remnants of an old logging road, but it felt untouched, unbothered, like it had been waiting for someone stubborn enough to care. I signed the papers that same week after confirming the survey twice. Every corner post, every coordinate was verified, recorded, and notarized. The title history was clean going back 40 years. I was free, finally free, from committees, supervisors, and the noise of other people's opinions. I spent the next year building my dream with my own hands. 2 stories of pine wood and steel, wrapped with a porch wide enough to hold my regrets. Down below, I built a workshop where I could tinker with engines and furniture, and above, a viewing deck where I could watch thunderstorms crawl across the horizon like slow gods. There wasn't a single neighbor in sight, and that was exactly the way I wanted it. No rules, no HOA newsletters, no parking citations for leaving a wheelbarrow too close to a fence. For the first time since I was a teenager, I could breathe. Most mornings I'd wake up before sunrise, make a pot of black coffee, and sit on the porch while coyotes yipped in the distance. The air smelled of dust and cedar. On clear days, I could see as far as the San Juan Mountains, the peaks like silver teeth biting the horizon. It was a good life. Simple, earned, and mine. But peace never lasts long when other people start running out of it. 2 years after I settled in, construction trucks began to appear on the far ridge to the east. At first it was just survey crews, men in neon vests hammering stakes into the soil, but soon after came the graders, the bulldozers, and the smell of wet asphalt. By winter, the ridge had a name, Suncrest Estates. An exclusive community of sustainable luxury homes, the billboard said, as if that meant anything. I didn't care much. Their property line was a good 300 feet from mine, and they had to snake a private road halfway down the ridge to reach it. Let them have their smart sprinklers and imported turf. I was fine watching from a distance. For a while, that distance held. Then came Marla Hendricks. She arrived 9 months ago in a gleaming pearl-white Tesla and a cloud of perfume so heavy you could smell it over the junipers. Realtor, influencer, and self-proclaimed community liaison. Her house, a sprawling faux Mediterranean palace with sandstone columns and a pool that glowed blue even in daylight, sat right on the edge of my boundary line. Too close, uncomfortably close. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. She had her life, I had mine. But she didn't seem content leaving it that way. Within weeks, she started appearing at my gate, always smiling, that kind of brittle realtor smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The first time was to introduce herself. The second time to ask if I'd consider joining the Suncrest community as an honorary resident. I told her politely that I preferred to live without meetings, newsletters, or committees deciding what shade my fence should be. Her smile didn't even flicker, but I noticed the way she looked at my property, at the open land stretching beyond her manicured backyard, like she was measuring it. After that, the visits became notes. Small envelopes tucked under my gate latch, printed with the Suncrest logo. They started friendly, then turned formal. We'd like to discuss a potential easement alignment. Our new boundary landscaping may overlap your drainage runoff. We'd appreciate your cooperation as a neighboring property owner. I ignored them, all until one Friday morning. I woke to find a man in a high-vis jacket standing on my driveway, clipboard in hand, measuring something with a laser rangefinder. I stepped out onto the porch. "Can I help you?" He startled, then glanced at the device in his hand. "Just verifying lot dimensions for the Suncrest Association, sir." Routine stuff. Routine stuff happens on their land, I said, not mine. He muttered something about shared drainage boundaries, but he backed off quick when I took a few steps toward him. That evening, an envelope arrived, hand-delivered, not mailed. Thick paper, embossed seal, expensive ink. I didn't need to open it to know it came from Marla. Still, I did. Inside was a formal notice of unauthorized encroachment. According to Suncrest's updated spatial analysis, my workshop and a portion of my fence extended 12 feet into community land. I actually laughed when I read that. Then I stopped laughing, because stapled behind the letter was a satellite photo, one of those low-resolution Google Earth images, with a red line drawn across my property in the wrong place entirely. It was so absurd, it almost felt deliberate. The next morning, Marla herself showed up, dressed in white slacks and mirrored sunglasses, flanked by the same clipboard guy. She smiled like a politician and handed me another copy of the letter. "Mr. Callahan," she said sweetly, "we'd love to resolve this amicably. The association just wants to correct the property lines before there's any confusion." "Confusion?" I said. "You're accusing me of building a house on your land." She tilted her head. "Not mine. The community's, but yes, technically." I could feel the heat rising in my neck. "And you confirmed this with the county records?" "Our landscape committee reviewed everything thoroughly," she replied, holding up that same blurred satellite image. "Your landscape committee," I repeated. "Not an actual surveyor?" Her smile thinned, but she didn't answer. "You've got 20 seconds to get off my property," I told her, voice steady. "After that, I'll call the sheriff." She didn't flinch. "We'll be in touch soon." They left. But as she turned to go, she tossed one last line over her shoulder, soft, sing-song, but sharp enough to cut. "You'll regret making this difficult." That night, I sat in my workshop, staring at the old metal filing cabinet that held all my documents. Top drawer, third folder. Inside were the notarized deeds, the original survey maps, and GPS coordinates I'd double-checked before laying the foundation. Everything was airtight. I photographed every sheet, uploaded them to cloud storage, and printed backup copies just in case. Something told me this wasn't just neighborly posturing. People like Marla didn't fight for truth. They fought for control, and she had a community board, money, and a dozen homeowners who'd believe whatever version of reality her smile sold them. But she didn't have the truth, and that I still owned. For a few days after Marla's little visit, things went quiet. Too quiet. I knew better than to think it was over. People like her didn't retreat. They regrouped. They plotted. They hid behind committees and bylaws until they found the next weak point to press. I went about my days pretending not to care. I fixed a busted window latch, sanded down an oak table I'd been working on for months, even took the truck into town for groceries. But under all that routine, there was a steady hum of anger running through me. On the third day, it started again. A certified letter showed up in my mailbox, thick and official-looking. The header read, Suncrest Estates Property Dispute Committee. The language was sterile, but the message wasn't. I was to cease unauthorized occupation and submit a voluntary correction plan within 15 business days. 15 days to undo 3 years of my life. At the bottom, in a section labeled Compliance Warning, was a line that made me laugh out loud. Failure to comply may result in the removal of non-conforming structures at the owner's expense. They were threatening to tear down my workshop. That night, I called Wesley Hart, a friend of mine who used to work as a senior land assessor for the state, the kind of man who could read a parcel map like scripture. I sent him scans of every deed, every survey, every coordinate I had. 2 hours later, he called back. His voice had that low, cautious tone that told me something was off. "Tom," he said, "your records are solid. Everything matches up with the county's data, down to the foot. So what's the problem?" "Well," he said, "there's an updated zoning overlay filed 6 months ago by Suncrest Development Group. The coordinates on their map, Shift your eastern boundary about 35 feet inward. My stomach dropped. They can't just shift a boundary. They shouldn't, he said. But they did. Wesley offered to run a fresh ground survey, independent and certified. I told him to go ahead. 3 days later, he emailed me a high-resolution overlay showing both maps. Red lines for theirs, blue for mine. The difference was impossible to miss and impossible to mistake. Because according to the real GPS data, Marla's entire backyard, half her pool, and her fancy glass gazebo were sitting on my land. I stared at that screen for a long time. A cold, satisfied anger began to crawl its way up my spine. They'd accused me of stealing their land, but it was them who'd stolen from me. I printed out the report, stapled it to the HOA's letter, and slid both into a fresh folder labeled Suncrest. Then I started making calls. The next morning, I drove down to the Sandoval County Land Services office. A young clerk in a blue vest looked up from his screen as I stepped in. "Morning," I said. "I need to file a dispute regarding a boundary modification." He handed me a form and I filled it out line by line. When I slid the folder across the counter, he glanced through the documents and raised an eyebrow. "Sir, this survey's recent, certified 3 days ago," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then this is serious. Looks like someone altered the recorded coordinates without a formal adjustment petition." Meaning they can't legally do that. Whoever submitted this new overlay might be in trouble. Good, I thought. That evening, I filed a preliminary motion for encroachment with the county clerk's office. I attached every document, every timestamp, and a notarized affidavit from Wesley's firm. I didn't stop there. The following day, I paid for 2 cease and desist letters, one addressed to Marla Hendricks personally, and another to the Suncrest Estates HOA Board of Directors. Both were sent certified mail, signature required. By Friday, the war had begun. At exactly 5:12 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Mr. Callahan," a man's voice said, clipped and smooth. "This is David Krause, legal counsel for Suncrest Estates. We received your correspondence. We'd like to request a good faith meeting to discuss a resolution." "Resolution?" I asked. "You mean an apology?" He paused. "Let's not escalate needlessly." "Too late," I said, and hung up. That night, I posted a single line on the Pine Mesa community page online. "Before you accuse someone of stealing land, make sure your pool isn't sitting on theirs." I attached a blurred version of the overlay without names or details. I didn't expect much from it, just a little air in their bubble. But within 24 hours, the post exploded. Over 200 comments, dozens of reactions, and more importantly, whispers from inside Suncrest itself. People wanted to know who was involved. They started comparing their own property lines. A few homeowners discovered inconsistencies, driveways that suddenly overlapped, fences that didn't match the recorded plots. The HOA page went dark the next day. By Monday morning, the county inspector called me personally. His name was Levi Garner, a soft-spoken guy I'd met once years ago during a forest zoning audit. "Tom," he said, "we've cross-checked your claim. And I'm going to be honest, this one's bad. The HOA's own filings show a major boundary discrepancy. Marla's property is overbuilt by almost 9/10 of an acre." "Almost an acre?" I repeated. "Yeah, and not in her favor." He told me the county would be issuing a formal notice of encroachment within the week. Once that happened, the ball would be in my court. I thanked him, then spent the rest of the day pacing my porch. The wind had picked up, rolling across the ridge like surf. The air smelled like rain and victory. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like Marla didn't lose quietly. Sure enough, 2 evenings later, I saw headlights creeping down my drive. A silver SUV stopped just short of the gate, and Marla stepped out wearing a blazer and heels that didn't belong on dirt. She stayed by her car, calling across the fence. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Callahan," she said. Her voice sugar-sweet but tight around the edges. Truth tends to do that. I replied. She crossed her arms. You really think you can win this? We have lawyers, a board, and a community behind us. I shrugged. And I have facts. Her lips pressed thin. You'll regret dragging this into the public eye. Already don't, I said. Now get off my property before I add trespassing to the list. She turned to leave, but I caught something in her eyes then. Not anger, but calculation. The kind of cold, patient malice that waits for you to blink first. As her taillights disappeared up the road, I realized I wasn't just in a boundary dispute anymore. I was in a war of perception, and if she wanted to play dirty, I could play patient. That weekend, I built a new section of fencing along the disputed line. Steel posts, barbed wire, and a sign that read simply, "Private land, surveyed and certified." By Monday, her lawyer sent another letter accusing me of provocative construction. I framed it and hung it above my desk. For the next 2 weeks, the county's investigation churned in the background. Surveyors came and went, marking coordinates with fluorescent tape. I kept to myself, doing small repairs and pretending the drama didn't matter. But inside, I felt something I hadn't in years. Purpose. I'd spent half my life enforcing other people's boundaries. Now I was defending my own. When the official report arrived, it was 3 pages long, stamped and sealed by the county surveyor. It left no room for debate. The property line I'd built on was correct. Marla's home, her pool, her patio, all sat squarely on my land. The inspector even added a final note. Owner Callahan's structure conforms to all recorded boundaries. Encroachment confirmed originating from Lot 22B. Suncrest Estates, Lot 22B, Marla's lot. That same afternoon, I filed a motion for removal of unauthorized structures and a claim for adverse possession damages. I knew it would take weeks, maybe months to process. But that was fine, because unlike them, I could wait forever. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The coyotes were back that night, their howls echoing across the ridge like laughter. And as the moonlight washed over my porch, I realized something. They'd wanted to scare me into giving up. Instead, they'd handed me the very proof that could destroy them. By the time the county's report hit the public record, I'd already memorized every inch of it. I'd read the words over and over until they lost meaning, like reciting a prayer too often. But each time, I still felt that same pulse of satisfaction. Encroachment confirmed. Unauthorized construction. Violation of county zoning code. They were small sentences, but together, they were an earthquake. It took 2 days for Suncrest Estates to respond. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, the kind they usually reserved for landscaping budgets or who left their trash cans out too long. But this time, the subject line read, "External legal threat." By then, my little community post had turned into a wildfire. People all over Pine Mesa had heard about the feud between the mountain hermit and the HOA queen. Someone even made a meme, Marla's mansion, photoshopped onto a raft labeled "Free Real Estate." It was funny, until I realized what it really meant. Her empire was cracking, and the neighbors were watching. On the 3rd morning after the report went public, a courier showed up at my door with a manila envelope. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a letter from Suncrest's attorney, full of legal padding and conditional language, offering amicable resolution via land transfer. The second was a check, the amount $75,000. I stared at it for a long time, almost laughing. They thought I could be bought. They thought I'd trade away nearly an acre of mountain soil and my pride for what amounted to hush money. I didn't cash the check. I framed it right next to the first cease and desist letter. Later that day, I called Levi, the county inspector who'd handled the official verification. I told him what they'd tried to do. He sighed. "That's a quiet settlement attempt, Tom. They're trying to end it before it hits court records." "Too late," I said. "I filed the claim last week." He chuckled. "Then buckle up. It's about to get messy. Messy didn't begin to describe it. Within a week, I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near the end of my road. SUVs with tinted windows. People with clipboards snapping photos of my fence line. At first, I thought they were journalists. But a closer look told me otherwise. Private surveyors hired by Suncrest's legal team, probably hoping to find some technical loophole. They didn't. Instead, they found Marla's pergola sitting squarely on my land, her pool filter built into my soil, and her drainage pipe cutting through my drainage ditch. I didn't have to exaggerate a thing. The evidence spoke for itself. When the court summons finally arrived, I felt more relief than dread. It was official now, real, documented, and no longer just whispers between neighbors. The first hearing was held in a small beige county courtroom. I wore my best flannel shirt and jeans. Marla arrived in a white blazer and pearl earrings, her lawyer in tow. He was slick, fast-talking, and smelled faintly of desperation. The judge, an older woman named Ellen Vasquez, looked unimpressed by both sides. She skimmed through the documents, then fixed her eyes on Marla's attorney. "Mr. Kraus," she said, "according to the county's certified report, your client's property extends beyond recorded boundaries by approximately 0.87 acres. How does the association intend to address this?" He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, there are discrepancies in the survey methodology." "Which survey?" she interrupted. "The one conducted by Mr. Hart's firm? The one cross-verified by county records?" She pressed. He hesitated. "Yes, but—" "Then there's no discrepancy," she said flatly. The silence that followed could have frozen air. Marla sat stiff, her face an elegant mask of irritation. She kept glancing at me, but I refused to meet her eyes. Then my turn came. The judge asked me to state my intent regarding the encroached structures. "I just want my land back," I said simply, and an acknowledgement that the HOA's claim was false. The judge nodded. "Fair. We'll reconvene after review of physical evidence." Outside, reporters waited, snapping photos like I was some kind of folk hero. I didn't say a word to them. I didn't need to. By the next week, the HOA's perfect image started collapsing. A few of their own members began leaking emails, discussions between Marla and her inner circle about how to neutralize my claim before it reached the county. One message, dated 2 months before they ever accused me, contained the line: "We can adjust the East Ridge line overlay. No one will notice." But someone did. Me. I submitted those emails to the court as supplemental evidence. The judge called them troubling. Marla's lawyer called them taken out of context. Either way, the damage was done. When word spread that Suncrest had forged its own internal maps, the community turned on itself. Property owners began demanding audits. Board members resigned. The HOA's reputation, once their sharpest weapon, became a liability. Overnight, I didn't enjoy watching Marla's empire crumble. Not exactly. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel righteous. The next month crawled by in a haze of hearings and filings. Every week brought a new motion, a new attempt from her side to delay the inevitable. But truth, once documented, doesn't tire. It just waits. Then came the moment I'd been working toward. The court ruled in my favor. The order was short and cold. All structures belonging to Lot 22B are deemed encroaching upon Plaintiff Callahan's property. Ownership of said encroached area is hereby transferred back to plaintiff. In simpler terms, everything built on that land, pool, patio, gazebo, and guest house, now belong to me. When the bailiff handed me the certified judgment, I felt the weight of 3 years lift off my shoulders. Marla didn't say a word as the ruling was read. She just sat there, pale and tight-lipped, staring at the table like she could burn a hole through it. Afterward, her lawyer approached me, still trying to save face. "We'd like to negotiate a repurchase agreement," he said. I smiled. "Tell her to send another check. I'll frame that one too." The following week, I walked the edge of my property, now officially expanded by nearly an acre. The air felt cleaner. the silence deeper. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt done. But peace is addictive. Once you've fought for it, you want to make sure it lasts. So I decided not to sell the reclaimed house or even rent it. I had a better idea. A few years back, an old friend of mine, Jack Trujillo, a former Marine, had started a nonprofit for veterans transitioning out of service. We'd talked for years about building a retreat, a quiet space where soldiers could reconnect with something real. Now I had space and purpose. Jack and I got to work. We stripped the fancy pergola, ripped out the glass patio tiles, and turned the guest house into a wood shop. We covered the pool and transformed the area into a garden, ringed by fire pits and cedar benches. The house that had been a monument to vanity became a refuge for those who needed peace more than prestige. Word got around quick. Some of the same neighbors who'd once avoided me started sending messages, apologies, even gratitude. One couple brought over pie. Another offered to mow part of the western hill. And as the new veterans' retreat took shape, I realized something had shifted in Pine Mesa. The HOA that once acted like a kingdom had become quieter, humbler. Its new board, forced by court order to hold public audits, stayed out of everyone's business. As for Marla, I didn't see her again. Not until spring. It was a cold April morning. The kind where the air still bites but the sun finally starts to forgive you. I was replacing a motion light near the workshop when I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. A gray sedan stopped near my gate. Marla stepped out, thinner, dressed down. No makeup, no jewelry, just a plain sweater and sunglasses that looked too large for her face. She stood there for a moment, staring at the retreat, the house that used to be hers. I didn't move. Neither did she. Then, without a word, she turned, got back into her car, and drove away. I watched until the dust settled. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was defeat. Either way, I never saw her again. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat on the upper terrace as the sun went down. The wind had softened, carrying the scent of cedar and rain. I looked over the ridge, the same ridge that had once held nothing but fences and bitterness, and saw the veterans laughing around the fire pit. For the first time since I'd built my home, I felt the kind of peace that didn't need defending. Not because I'd won, but because I'd built something worth keeping. 6 months passed before I realized I hadn't thought about the HOA in weeks. The quiet had become normal again, the kind of silence that feels earned. Most mornings started the same way now, the smell of pine, the sound of distant birds, and the low hum of voices from the workshop down the hill. Veterans carving, talking, healing. Sometimes I'd walk down there just to listen. It's strange. I built this place for peace, but what I found instead was purpose. There's a difference, I think. Peace is something you protect. Purpose is something you share. The legal papers were still framed on my wall. The judgment, the survey, and yes, that first check for $75,000. Visitors always laughed when they saw it. To me, it wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder of how far I'd let pride push me before I learned what really mattered. Then one morning in late summer, I got a letter. No return address, no signature. Just a folded sheet of stationery with careful handwriting. It read, "I was wrong. I let power make me cruel. I hope what you've built brings you peace." I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hand. I thought about the woman who once stood on her deck giving orders like a general, and how small she must have felt writing this. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release, for both of us. That evening, I took the letter outside and burned it in the fire pit. The smoke curled upward, soft and silver, disappearing into the blue. When it was gone, I felt lighter. A week later, we installed a new sign at the gate. Simple metal, nothing fancy. It read, "Callahan Ridge, Veterans Retreat." Underneath, in smaller letters, "Land reclaimed. Peace restored." Every time I see it, I think about that word, reclaimed. It doesn't just mean taking something back. It means giving it meaning again. Marla's name stopped coming up in conversation after that. People moved on. The HOA held elections, rebranded, softened. Pine Mesa slowly became what it was always supposed to be, a community, not a battleground. As for me, I finally learned how to rest. Sometimes at sunset, I'll sit by the old property line, and the one that caused all this, and watch the shadows stretch across the fence. I can still picture where her pool used to shimmer in the light, now replaced by rows of sunflowers. They grow fast up here, strong, resilient. Maybe they always were, waiting for space to breathe. When visitors ask what happened here, I usually smile and tell them the truth. That's a long story, but it ends well, because it does. It ends with laughter echoing across the ridge, with scars that don't hurt anymore, with land that belongs not to me, not to anyone, but to peace itself. And sometimes when the wind hits just right, I swear I can hear the faint creak of an old wooden gate, the sound of something closing, and something better opening.